Frank.
Good morning.
Hi, Frank.
When I look at Orkan, I feel completely underdressed.
As an organizer, I must do like that. Okay. Okay. If you don't mind, we have just 1 minute for all participants.
No problem. No problem.
Okay. I'm accepting all participants. Okay. Okay. We can start.
Can we start?
We can start.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I hope you are all doing good and feeling safe. First of all, I would like to thank to all of you for taking time out and being here with us. As you know, today we will talk about crisis management, and we will discuss the situation and how to handle these difficult times. First, I would like to introduce you our speaker, Frank Bannysin. He's an international business trainer, coach, and consultant. And Frank has more than 30 years of experience in different parts of the world, in international companies, in coaching, training, and consulting. And Frank will share his ideas, knowledge, and experience with us today. Before starting our meeting, I would like to kindly remind you to turn off your microphones and to turn on your camera if it's possible. And if you have any question, you can just raise your hand so we can see you, or you can write your questions to the input. If all are meeting, Frank, we would love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Let me just try to split the screen in order to go to the presentation. Can everybody see that? Orkan, can you see it if you quickly raise your hand?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody can see it. Then let's start. Well, first of all, thanks to all of you for participating in this webinar on a Sunday late morning in Azerbaijan. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm 58 years old and I'm working for a consulting company that is placed in Singapore, and we are consulting large business families in strategic matters. Currently, many of our clients are contacting us regarding how to react in this crisis situation. I'm also a certified executive coach and trainer. And before that, I was working for more than 20 years in executive management for a German banknote printing company. By the way, while I was in charge of a banknote printing company in Ottawa, Canada, we were printing the currency also of your country at that time. So this is a bit my background. Talking about pragmatic crisis management, in this webinar, I would like to address 4 messages. The first message is every crisis, also the existing COVID-19 crisis, usually has a few phases. Usually it has 4 phases. And I would like to quickly introduce them to you. How a company will master a crisis has a lot to do how the company is reacting in the first phase. Yeah, the first phase in a crisis is usually a most important one. And I think we can say that basically all countries and all companies in the current COVID crisis, we are still most likely in the first phase. In order to master the first phase, I would like to introduce you with a pragmatic checklist for the first phase. And there are a couple of highlights of actions that are particularly interesting for HR executives like you. And I would like to end this short webinar with 2 more slides regarding how can you, in a very pragmatic way, as an HR executive, support the other executives and managers and team leaders of your companies in a crisis, because in all crises, people are working under stress, under pressure, and I would like to introduce 2 things for you. Is that okay? Then let's get started with the phases of a crisis. We have here at the bottom the crisis timeline. Yeah, so here this is the future. We are somewhere here. And on this y-axis, on the north-south axis, we can map the crisis extent, the magnitude of the crisis. How can we measure that? Well, in the COVID-19 crisis, one measurement that many countries, if not all, look at the moment are the number of cases, yeah, in a country, the own country, or in the country of the relevant markets. And there are 4 phases. I will give them a particular name a bit later on. And this is the usual flow of a crisis. It means at the beginning, nobody is really aware that there is a crisis. So quite often people lose a bit time, yeah, because it starts very, very small. In early January, I think it started with a few isolated cases in a city in China, yeah, and some people read it, most people didn't read it, and I think nobody would have thought that 1 or 2 months later, nearly everybody is directly or indirectly affected. And then there is the moment of realization, oops, we have a problem, and the crisis is increasing, the extent is increasing, and the first phase usually ends when one can see where there is the peak. Yeah, you see, for instance, if you read at the moment, the Guardian newspaper, there is discussion in the UK, have we reached the peak or not? And I don't know exactly, I'm not a doctor, but I would say from what I read, basically Germany, Italy, Austria, Australia, yeah, we are all somewhere here, yeah, maybe even a bit left to it. The second phase ends when one gets a good understanding how long will the crisis take to end. And in our current COVID crisis, there are basically 2 scenarios that are under discussion. One is some people speculate, well, it could end somehow, hopefully in the next couple of months, should there be some medicine or whatever being detected, but there also could be a second peak. So currently we don't know it, but we need to keep it in mind that some of the things we do here in the first phase to which I come later on might be relevant later on again. And phase 3 usually ends when one sees the light at the end of the tunnel. This is pretty much far out. The first phase we call rapid response or resolute response. Here, speed and fast decision making is of highest importance. Yeah, speed and fast decision making, learning, making mistakes, realizing that we made mistakes and adjusting them quickly. This is of highest importance. The second phase we call rapid resilience. That is where we basically build the strength in order to get through the crisis. Here we plan the return back to normal, or better, back to new normal. And the fourth phase is basically adjusting to the new reality. These are the 4 phases. And what we need to understand, particularly from an HR perspective, crisis, every severe crisis means pressure. It means stress. It also means anxieties, because there are negative impacts on the revenues, on the profitability, on liquidity. And executives in a company have to realize that the strategic plans and the budgets they had, most companies approved their budgets in December, November, December, something like that. Now it's April, and we have to realize that this is not longer realistic. Last week, our team was supporting one of our clients in a Southeast Asian country because they have realized that their revenues in the last 3 weeks collapsed by 90%, 90, right? And this is also causing anxieties among the employees and additional pressures for the management teams. And here, the role of HR is also to support the executives, for instance, by helping them to communicate well, by connecting them, also by giving them some very pragmatic support in how to lead a team in a crisis situation. This is the stuff I will address at the end of the webinar. Because there is one potential risk. If this is not addressed in a professional way, there could be a sort of negative downward spiral, where a lack of resources, pressure can lead to conflicts, can lead to bad communication. And if this downward spiral is not addressed or somehow halted, there is the risk that the medium or long-term performance of the company is at risk. And for this reason, I come back to what I said earlier. It's very, very important to find some good answers, some good reactions in the first phase. The time that might be lost here in this first phase is very, very difficult to recover when the extent of the crisis basically is increasing without some proper measures to reduce their impact. So what does that mean now? What do we have to keep in mind when we talk about this rapid response phase, the first phase. I would like to show you 5 pragmatic suggestions. The first one is speed is important. And this means decision making is important. And this is a big hurdle for many executives because we usually like to take decisions when we know quite a lot about our context, about potential implications of our decisions. But in a crisis, or particularly in a crisis like this, we do not know a lot. We have really no good idea how decisions that we take turn out. And here the advice is decide fast, monitor fast the impacts, and then adjust. Don't wait. The second focus is a bit more for the CEO and the CFO. It means make sure that you have enough cash, enough liquidity in the company, and make sure that you save liquidity wherever possible, and also make sure that the customers you're still serving will pay you, even if you give them some specific payment terms. I don't want to go too much into finance because the audience in this webinar is coming from an HR background. I only want to mention usually CEOs and CFOs look at the profit and loss statement, where revenues and costs and earnings before and after taxes are stated. This might not be good enough because it doesn't have a complete focus on cash. The reporting instrument should be the cash flow or the cash flow statement, but this is just a side remark. The third one is addressing the response towards the employees. Having talked about saving cash, one could say, okay, let's lay off employees because this will save cash. On the other hand, there is a very big downside, or there are basically 2 big downsides. The first big downside is that by laying off employees, we lose expertise, we lose experience, we lose know-how. And secondly, if we lay them off immediately, we don't show loyalty. So all we want to do here is highlight that if we show loyalty towards employees and carry them through this difficult period, they will be loyal to us later. Let me give you one example from another client which we are currently consulting in Central America. It's a client who has in his enterprise portfolio a lot of restaurants. And of course, in this country, restaurants are closed at the moment due to the lockdown. And there are basically no revenues. And the CEO of the company, together with the owners, took the decision not to lay off their people. They found an agreement with them that they pay 50 or 60% of their wages or of their salaries, and try to get through this together. And by this, they basically invest into the loyalty into their employees, and they will most likely repay that in the future when hopefully the restaurants can be open again. Fourth point, I said at the beginning, point number 1, we do not know a lot. So under these circumstances, it doesn't make sense to predict the future. But what one can do is one can simulate the future. That means we make certain assumptions in regards to revenues, in regards to our cost base, and so on. What if scenarios, so that we can say that we get an idea in regards to our liquidity, our cash, what will happen should the short-term future turn out like we assumed in scenario A or scenario B and the scenario C. This here, these simulations where we can try to determine the depth and the extent of the crisis under certain assumptions is helping us, back to point one, in order to decide fast. Yeah, so point one and point four have to be seen together. And then the fifth point, very important, particularly also for HR executives, communicate, communicate, communicate. In a crisis, everybody is concerned, everybody is afraid, and this is completely okay. And what people need is orientation. And here our suggestion is to communicate openly and honestly, because this is the platform, the basis of trust. Openly and honestly means don't be overly pessimistic, don't be overly optimistic, say what you know, but also say what you don't know. There is, since many years, psychology research that has been done. It says, or the results of this research says, people can better deal with bad news than with no news. And very good companies in the crisis are companies where from the top and also from HR, there is a constant flow of communication towards the employees, towards the customers, and also towards other stakeholders like suppliers or so on. So these are some high-level suggestions for the rapid response phase. And we have also prepared a checklist. Don't get afraid about all these details. I will send it to Orkan for distribution. I will also send a larger article that we published 2 or 3 weeks ago with more extensive checklists. I do not want to go through all of these. You will see in a second that I will show some green boxes around some of these things, which from my point of view have a high relevance for HR. The items on this checklist are summarized under 4 headlines. One is execution, clarity, and speed. So you will see a couple of suggestions. Second one, team, health, and security. Third headline is protect cash. And the fourth headline is addressing the constant communication. So let's have a first look. Where can specifically HR help? Well, for instance, supporting decision makers to focus on fast decision making, and also on supporting them to make mistakes and to learn fast. Second one, supporting the top management team that all relevant teams for crisis response are connected. Quite often, companies work out of departments, yeah, and you know that there are sometimes walls between departments, sales, operations, and so on. in a crisis, you gain speed by removing walls and putting teams together across department or from members coming from across department. Supporting, maybe also training your teams for fast and decentralized decision making is important, giving them some pragmatic suggestions how to formulate options, how to take decisions, how to monitor constantly in order to adapt. This is of high importance. And this goes hand in hand with coaching or with mentoring executives, project leaders, and team leaders to allow mistakes and to encourage fast learning. Quite often, we see that company cultures are afraid to make mistakes, and I'm not a big fan of mistakes, but if we have to decide fast, we will make mistakes. If making mistakes is punished, then people will not decide fast, and we will then lose in the first phase lots of time. In regards to team health and security, it's important to establish one team that will be that will have the overall responsibility in the company to address the crisis. And quite often this team cannot be physically together due to restrictions. So one has to support a virtual situation room, for instance, via Zoom. And here a very important contribution of HR is organizing pragmatic trainings, how to have meetings in a virtual environment, how to lead discussions via Zoom, and so on. Train teams and employees fast how to protect themselves from infections. It sounds like something that is common sense, but here in Germany, if I look around the last 3-4 weeks, we saw companies that immediately did that, but we also saw companies that took 2 or 3 weeks in order to address this topic, with all the negative consequences on the morale and the motivation of the employees. Employees also need support, especially also their families, if they have been tested positive. Nobody knows it better like you, that home office work is important and needs to be supported. And also, we see that quite often employees who have to work out of a home office, in particular if they have to be tested positive, but even if they are not tested positive, they have extra stress under the current conditions. And something HR executives should look into, is there a possibility to provide psychological support for the employees in need? Protecting cash, this is something more for the finance folks, but from an HR perspective, here you can support the executive team, especially the finance team, to proactively communicate with the employees if cash-saving decisions have to be taken and affect them. It is better to communicate this in a respectful way proactively than not communicating it at all. Focus on the security, this I mentioned, and also your input in regards to defining, we say in this situation, define 3 scenarios, a bad scenario, a very bad scenario, and a worst case scenario. I think currently there are not really good scenarios, and we should prepare for that. And then we come to communicate proactively. Not every CEO, not every general manager is a born communicator. and this is not a problem at all. But it is very wise if HR executives who are close to the organization, who are close to the employees, also give their suggestion and recommendations to general managers and other top managers how to communicate with authenticity and honesty, addressing the questions that are of particular concern and interest of the employees. HR can and should support the crisis response team to hold quick and regular meetings, not only within the crisis response teams, but also with bigger audiences, yeah, and a sort of waterfall communication with the organization. And finally, what is important is support the organization in regards to lessons learned, because in regards to this COVID-19 crisis, nobody knows whether there will be a second increase. But even if this hopefully will not happen, there will be crisis situations in the future, and hopefully not as bad as this one, but crisis is part of business. And a lessons learned is not only addressing which mistakes have we done and what should we do differently. A lessons learned diary or a lessons learned analysis should in particular also identify what we did very well. In many companies, we see lessons learned is only done in regards to mistakes or bad decisions. And this is not too smart, because if we are not identifying what went well and why it went well, then we might forget about it. Yeah, let's say in 2 years from now, there is a crisis, and a couple of things we did extremely well. In 2 years, we might not be able to use this knowledge because maybe the people have moved to different places. Maybe we have forgotten it during the last 2 years. So bottom line is lessons learned is always important for the not so well done decisions and actions, but it is very important also for what we did very well. One final comment in regards to what is done in this crisis by other companies in operations. I know that the participants of this webinar come from HR, but I would assume that you work closely together with people in operations, and some of the best practice is a big word, but some of the actions they are doing, we want to share with you. You also get this slide, of course. What are they doing? Well, first of all, they are working in separated shifts, meaning each employee on the shop floor is basically assigned to one shift, and he stays in one shift. Yeah, so he is not working in shift A this week, in shift B next week, and in shift Z the week after. They work in one shift only. Why? Because if you have an employee who tests positive in shift A, then you might quarantine shift A, but shift B and C will not be affected by it. Yeah, we must never forget that between being positive on the virus and getting a positive result, there might be a time lag of 10 days or 15 days. And this time lag, it can spread between shifts. Couple of companies that we know, they establish this minimal distance on the shop floor between employees, and they show it on the floor. They indicate it with tapes and colors. They provide sanitary equipment. Shift changes are not done in the company. Yeah, so where you have the handover in the company, they make sure that there is no physical contact. if information has to be provided between shifts, they do it in writing, they do it electronically. They're also putting a high emphasis that the health and safety rules are really followed and the decisions are implemented, and they make sure that there is minimal interference of external people on the shop floor. Yeah, so suppliers and customers are not allowed to enter the premises. So these are some considerations. And now to end this webinar, two more very pragmatic things that most of you most likely know since many, many years, but it is relevant to be aware of that now so that you can support other members of your teams. The first thing is communication. In a crisis, we are all under stress and pressure. Yeah? In a crisis, psychologists call it, we go into our stress corner. And that means that sometimes the tone can change a bit. It's more sometimes a commanding tone, which has negative effects on morale, on motivation, and of employees. And we should always keep in mind one thing: effective communication in general has to meet two requirements. One is in regards to the factual part of a message. What has to be done by when, and who should do what by when, and so on, and which process we will do. This is on the factual side. And we can communicate it on the factual side either in a clear way that the receiver, the colleague, understands it, or we can do it in a very fuzzy way. I mean, this is trivial. Very important is that there is also a relationship side of a message, the tone. It can be very direct, very disrespectful. It can be very respectful. And I would suggest that you can do a very good, positive contribution as HR expert if you mentor a little bit your team, your executives, your project managers. This is the space of effective communication. It is clear on facts, but it is respectful on the relationship. Being clear on facts in a disrespectful do this tone might hurt people who are already in a very difficult situation and might affect their morale. This is the first thing. The second thing I would like to suggest to you is training and mentoring teams to become high performance teams. So for instance, like this group, a Formula One crew, which is changing under highest pressure, highest pressure under racing conditions, 4 wheels in less than 2 seconds. Have a look later on this afternoon on YouTube and look for the Red Bull pit stop world record. Type in Red Bull pit stop record. You see how they changed 4 wheels in 1.8 seconds. This is crisis situation. This is high pressure. And if we look at what are the characteristics of high performance teams, there are 6 criteria that differentiate a high performance team from a not so high performance teams. High performance teams, they have clear objectives. Everybody understands the objectives, they are clear. they are agreed upon, and they are also accepted. High performance teams have a high level of trust, and they have values and norms, for instance, like honesty, like respect, and so on, that are shared and lived. High performance teams have clearly defined rules and responsibilities. Everybody knows who is responsible for what. High performance teams do not have a high fear of conflict. That means if they have different opinions on what should be the right action to be taken in the next 3 days, they discuss it. Very importantly, I'm not jumping back to the slide before, but they discuss it respectfully. They are not being negative towards other colleagues who have a different opinion. They can accept different opinion, and the best argument will win. High performance teams have a high degree of accountability, for agreed responsibilities and results. So everybody knows who is responsible for what, but everybody is also accepting it, that if I take this responsibility, I have to deliver. And last but not least, high performance teams have a high degree of motivation and commitment. And they want to be successful, and they create an inner team culture where the motivation, even under pressure, is high. Final comment. These 6 criteria have to come together in order to be a high performance team. You can be strong on 4 or 5, but if the team is weak on 1 or 2, it is not getting really to the top level of performance. And where I can see in a crisis situation like this, a very big contribution where you can support your executive team, your project teams, and others in the organization, is have a pragmatic session with them. Doesn't have to take long, can be half an hour. Show them the video of YouTube. We did that with 1 or 2 clients last week. So we showed them this very impressive Red Bull pit stop and said, okay, why are they so good? Why don't they take 10 minutes to change 4 wheels? Why is it done in less than 2 seconds? And we made them aware about these things. And if you have them always on your radar screen, then you can help a team to progress in small steps, even in a crisis situation, to increase their level of performance. So this is what I have prepared for you in this webinar. And now, if anybody has questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, or to try to answer them. Orkan, back to you.
Dear Frank, thanks for presentation. We have some questions on chat box, if you see. One question from Lala. While working home office, in most cases, productivity decrease. What kind of measures, motivation can be taken in order to increase productivity of employees?
Orkan, I did not hear you very well. Can I, if I look at the chat, is this question
from Lala?
Communication and pressure? I didn't catch well. Was this the topic, or?
No, there is a question from Lala, Frank.
Okay. While working... Yeah. While working home office, in most cases, productivity decreases. What kind of measures and motivation can be taken in order to increase productivity? Yes, I would agree. Home office is not the best environment to be very productive, but what can we do? I can only, Lala, share with you what we are doing, because our team is also basically working from home. We connect very often in short alignment calls. So for instance, our partners are at different places, and we have sometimes three times a day short alignment calls to see where we stand. Alignment calls 10-15 minutes, where we check in whether we are on track with what we wanted to accomplish this day or in the next 2 days, and also where we can mutually support each other. Yeah, the biggest one of the big reasons, Lala, why productivity in the home office environment is decreasing is the lack of exchange, the lack of communication. Yeah, these small things. Yeah, and we try to get in touch quite often. Not 60 minutes per call. Yeah. But to stay in touch, to brainstorm a bit, yeah. And we also have the rule: if somebody needs something, yeah, let's shoot a WhatsApp, and we immediately connect on Skype or Zoom.
Thank you, Frank. We have also other questions, 2 more questions.
Yes. From Arzu, every time companies make next year budget with comparison to previous year, how should they make next year after the end of the global crisis? Well, in general, I speak now out of my old role, yeah, the role I had until 15 years ago, I think, as a regional CFO. When we did budgets for the next year, we did not look too much on the previous year. Of course, we looked at the previous year, but we were more looking at what are our best assumptions on key parameters for the next year, revenue-wise, cost-wise. And now, in this specific situation, where basically the future might not have many connections with the past, I would say base your forecasts and base your next budgets on new assumptions. Yeah, pool the best knowledge that you have in your team in regards to the customers, in regards to revenues, in regards to R&D investments, and plan from there. There might be stuff from the past that is relevant, yeah, but think more in how the future will develop, and try to make best assumptions from there. Then I have a question from Rustam. There is from Aygun and from Rustam in regards to loyalty. How can a company show loyalty? Well, first of all, if you show presence, if you contact your employees and tell them you are not alone in this, this is a first step. Yeah, many companies, for instance, in the US, yeah, they don't hear from upper management at all. Yeah, they get fired. End of it. Yeah, so communicating with them is a first step. Of course, communicating with them only is not addressing all their needs. I hesitate to give concrete suggestions because it depends on the individual situation of a company. All I can say, from past experiences in crisis situations, and they were not as bad as the COVID crisis, of course. We communicated to the employees that they would feel last the dramatic consequences. Yeah. So, for instance, I was in a situation 15 years ago where our revenues also collapsed 40–50% due to some disruptions in the industry. We communicated this openly, and we found agreements with them to carry them through this very difficult period, but they also had to make contributions. Yeah, meaning we were not able, and we told them that. Yeah, I told them, if you require that we continue paying you 100%, everybody will lose his or her job. Yeah, what we can offer is to go with you this route. Yeah, and this will mean that we make our contribution from top management. So we did not get our bonuses. We also said we do not want to get 100% pay. I mean, I was the subsidiary in the US. Yeah, I was the best paid guy. Yeah, so how can I expect from workers on the shop floor, yeah, that they sacrifice 30% of their salaries, yeah, while I basically keep mine. Yeah, so it's basically this. We are all in the same boat approach, which has to be lived and communicated in a very honest way. Sometimes one has to make very drastic decisions, and here where HR can also maybe support is the following. I remember a situation, and we also see it here, where sometimes companies have to make decisions that affect jobs where they have to lay off people. But the excellent companies we know do one thing. The HR departments, the HR experts are supporting employees who lose their job in finding new opportunities. Yeah, because usually the network that HR executives have towards other companies in the industry is much better than the network, yeah, that an employee on the shop floor has. Yeah, if he or she is losing the job, it's very difficult to find something else. And other companies say, okay, we don't give you the guarantee to find a job for you, but first of all, we give you some pragmatic training and support, how you write resumes, how you write applications, how you prepare for a job interview. And we also will proactively look into our network. Are there companies, despite the crisis, yeah, who need some people? Yeah, for instance, as replacements for people who are ill and something like this. Yeah, and if an HR team is proactively acting like this, you are not only contributing to the personal situation, to the one or other employee, it is certainly something that will shape the culture of the company in a positive way.
Frank, we also have a question from Fidan here. She asks, after getting back to normal life, it will take some time to get adapted. What can we do to improve this process?
Fidas, very, very, very difficult. It depends on the company. It basically tries to make some assumptions that are not too far away from reality, but who knows what there is in the future, that they are not too far from reality. How could our future business context look like? Let me give you an example, and this example might not be relevant to you, but you can transfer it into your reality. Let's assume the business of your company is food, it's restaurants. Just imagine that. currently, at least in Germany, you don't have any business unless you sell some food for home delivery, but all restaurants are closed. So Fidas, when you write, after getting back to normal, it will take some time to get adapted. What can we do to smooth this process? I would, for instance, if I would own a restaurant, I would say, okay, if the restrictions, the containment restrictions are eased, how could my future business environment look like until a cure for the COVID-19 crisis has been found? It will most likely look like that if my restaurant is allowed to open, I might be required to reduce my capacity by 50%, yeah, so that the space between tables become bigger, yeah, these famous 2 meters. I will be confronted with a situation where I have to meet safety requirements imposed by the governments, yeah. Staff wearing masks, wearing sanitary materials. I might be even required that I test the temperature of customers entering my restaurant. Yeah, there is a discussion, yeah, that at least in Germany, that this might be required, yeah, to have a check. When Orkan wants to eat in my restaurant, yeah, I check quickly his temperature, yeah, like at Singapore airport, yeah, in order to make sure, or at least get an indication, yeah, is there a risk or not. So how do I cope with this? Then I would think about, I mean, all these requirements are not too attractive, yeah, that individuals come into my restaurant to eat. I would think about, okay, under these circumstances, what else can I do to make it attractive and safe for clients, yeah, to come to my restaurant? In other words, Fidas, this is the only quick answer I can give to your question. I would say I would not assume that after this crisis, it will be as before this crisis. It will be a new before the crisis. It will be a new normal, a different normal. Yeah, it will, and here we cannot look into a crystal ball. All we can do is what your organization, for instance, is doing: networking, listening, reading, also reading online, maybe the one or other paper or contribution from other countries who also go through this. In other words, Fidas, try to get a good understanding how could the new normal look like, and learn as much as you can from others, yeah, who are in similar phases. Quick answer to Rustam: liquidity, it is related with finance, cash provisions. Yeah, it means make sure that you have money in the bank. And this is money in the bank is the most important KPI of a crisis.
Thank you, Frank. I think
one more question from Aysel. Is it a wise decision to change the organizational design structure of the company, especially eliminating 2 executive positions without any clear reason during the crisis? How do you think that it will affect the employees? Well, Aysel, I cannot comment to a specific question like this, of course, where I do not know the background. My general focus, my general answer would be the following, not knowing whether it fits to your situation. Number one, crisis is a time of highest uncertainty coming from the environment. In a crisis situation, I would not add to the uncertainty from internal by making too many changes if I really don't have to. Second thing is, as we mentioned earlier, in a crisis, time, speed is of the highest importance. Anything that is defocusing executives, people, from focusing on making important decisions, I would eliminate. And from my experience, organizational changes add a lot to internal focus, to discussions, politics, and so on. Yeah. So if there is not a real existential reason for making organizational design changes, I would never do it in a crisis. Because in a crisis, you have to work through teams, through crisis response teams anyway. Yeah, the formal organization is too rigid. Yeah, you have to have a crisis response team with their sub-crisis response teams. This is the organizational setup to respond fast in a crisis.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have any other questions? If we don't, Frank, I would like to thank you for a great webinar. It was very useful and informative session, and it was a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you for being with us in this webinar.
It was a pleasure. Thanks to all of you. Enjoy the rest of the Sunday and keep safe and healthy.
Thanks, Frank. See you.
Bye-bye from Munich. Bye-bye from Munich.
See you in Bangkok.
Have a nice day.